Before we go any further, I want you to do something simple but unusually honest. Think of one moment when your child almost told you something real, then changed direction. Maybe it was a shrug. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was a quick, "I'm fine," that didn't sound fine at all. Hold that moment in your mind while you listen, because by the end of this video, there's a strong chance you'll see that the problem was never just what your child said. The real story was what your child expected would happen next. And once you understand that, you start hearing your child differently. Because most children do not stop opening up all at once. They do it gradually, quietly, intelligently. They test the emotional temperature of the room. They try one honest sentence. They watch your face. They hear your tone. They feel the shift in your energy. And then they make a decision. Do I keep going, or do I protect myself? That decision shapes more parent-child relationships than almost anything people talk about online. Parents often think emotional distance starts with rebellion, disrespect, social media, bad influence, attitude, hormones, or some dramatic turning point. But in real life, distance often begins in very normal moments. A tired question after school, a disappointed look at the dinner table, a joke that lands wrong, a lecture that came too fast, a problem that instantly became bigger the second it entered the room. That is how children learn something they may never say out loud. My parent loves me, but my honesty is not always safe here. And if that sentence hurts to hear, good. Not because guilt is useful, but because clarity is. Once you see the pattern, you can finally change it. One of the biggest mistakes parents make is assuming that love automatically feels like safety. It does not. Love can be real and still feel intense. Love can be real and still feel controlling. Love can be real and still make a child feel watched, corrected, rushed, or emotionally cornered. Children do not open up simply because they know you care. They open up because your care feels survivable when they are confused, ashamed, overwhelmed, embarrassed, or not ready to say things perfectly. That is a very different thing. A child who is already stressed does not need to decode your love through panic. A teen who is already ashamed does not need to search for warmth inside a lecture. A child who feels exposed does not magically become honest just because the parent says, "You can tell me anything." In fact, that phrase backfires more often than people realize. You can tell me anything. Really, anything. Without your face changing, without your mood changing, without dinner feeling weird for 2 hours, without me becoming the center of a family concern I did not ask for. Children hear the difference between permission and capacity. Permission says, "You may tell me." Capacity says, "I can emotionally handle what you tell me." And children trust capacity far more than permission. That is why some of the most well-meaning parents slowly become the least emotionally accessible people in the child's life. Not because they do not care, but because every difficult truth comes with too much emotional movement attached to it. The room gets heavier. The questions multiply. The parent becomes more intense. The child becomes more careful. And now the child is not bringing you their real inner world. They are bringing you the version of it they think your nervous system can tolerate. That is not openness. That is editing. And editing becomes a survival skill in homes where reactions are stronger than understanding. The first invisible habit that pushes children away is urgency. Parents feel a shift and want answers immediately. Why are you so quiet? What happened? Talk to me. What's wrong now? Are you upset with someone? Did something happen at school? You seem off. Tell me, right now. It sounds caring. It sounds involved. It sounds responsible. But to a child who is already overloaded, urgency can feel like emotional pressure. Because maybe they do not know how to explain what happened yet. Maybe something weird happened socially, and they do not have language for it. Maybe they are embarrassed by how much it affected them. Maybe they are tired, overstimulated, hungry, flooded, and not ready to be interviewed in the kitchen under fluorescent lighting like a witness in a low-budget crime show. So they say nothing, or fine, or I don't know, or can you not right now? And the parent feels shut out. But often what is happening is not rejection, it is protection from having to process and perform at the same time. Children do not always hide because they are trying to be difficult. Sometimes they hide because the parent wants clarity before the child has even found their own. That gap matters. Because when parents rush in too quickly, they accidentally teach the child that every emotional wobble will immediately become a conversation. And when every wobble becomes a conversation, children stop showing the wobble. They become flatter, shorter, less expressive, more private. Not because they are healthier, because they are adapting. The second invisible habit is over-interpretation. This one damages trust quietly. A child comes home tired. The parent sees a crisis. A teen says they want to be alone. The parent hears rejection. A child has an off day. The parent starts building a theory. You're distant. You've changed. Something is wrong. You've been weird lately. Are your friends pressuring you? Are you hiding something? You never used to be like this. And now the child is not only dealing with whatever they were already feeling, now they are also dealing with your story about their feelings. That is exhausting. Especially for teenagers who are already living through an internal system update with half the emotional settings changing every week. One day they want closeness. The next day, your breathing is too loud. One day they need advice. The next day, the same advice feels like a personal attack. One day they seem mature and self-aware. The next day, they melt down because someone liked the wrong post 3 days ago. That is not evidence that they are irrational monsters. That is development mixed with sensitivity, identity building, exhaustion, peer awareness, and the endless humiliation of being a human in public before you fully know who you are. And when parents overinterpret normal fluctuation, children begin to feel watched at a level that makes honesty harder. Because now every mood is monitored, every silence gets decoded, every sentence becomes evidence. That is how kids start saying less, not because they want less connection, because every word feels like it could trigger a whole psychological documentary about their state of mind. The third invisible habit is emotional multitasking. This is when a child brings you a feeling and you bring them 5 things back. They say they are stressed. You bring concern, advice, correction, future planning, and your own anxiety. They say they got left out. You bring sympathy, strategy, suspicion about the friend group, and a 10-minute speech on self-worth. They say school is hard. You bring support, then concern, then disappointment, then a whole subplot about how much you sacrifice for this family. Now the child is no longer sharing one feeling. They are managing an emotional traffic jam. And that is one reason kids go silent. Because silence is simpler. Children often do not need a parent to be emotionless. They need a parent whose emotions do not immediately become another full-time job. This is especially true for sensitive children and teens. They notice everything. Your eyebrows, your sigh, the pause before you say, okay. The tone that sounds calm but absolutely is not calm. They can feel when the emotional center of the room shifts from their experience to your reaction. And once that happens, many children stop telling the truth at the exact point where they most need support. Not because they do not trust your love, because they do not trust the emotional workload that will come with your love in that moment. The fourth invisible habit is turning vulnerability into improvement. This one is everywhere. A child says they feel left out. The parent starts teaching confidence. A teen says they are insecure. The parent starts correcting their thinking. A child says they are scared. The parent starts explaining why they do not need to be. A teen says they hate something about themselves. The parent rushes in with perspective, logic, solutions, and motivational content that sounds like a TED Talk written by someone who has never been 14. The parent thinks, I am helping. The child feels, my feeling is already being edited. Children do not open up more when every emotion immediately gets turned into a project. They open up more when they feel something much rarer. Contact before correction. That means there is a pause where the child feels seen before they feel shaped. A moment where the parent is not improving them yet. A moment where the child can feel, my inner experience has landed somewhere safe enough to exist without being instantly optimized. That sounds like this. That sounds painful. I can see why that hit hard. You don't have to explain it perfectly. You wanted me to get it before I fixed it. That must have felt humiliating. No wonder you shut down. Those kinds of lines do something most parents underestimate. They lower the child's need to defend reality. And when a child no longer has to fight to prove that their feeling is real, the relationship gets softer very fast. Not weak, softer. And softness is often what allows truth to come out. The fifth invisible habit is making small problems feel emotionally huge. This one teaches hiding at lightning speed. A child forgets an assignment. Now the future appears. A teen makes one awkward social mistake. Now there's a whole conversation about judgment, reputation, peer pressure, self-respect, and long-term consequences. A child lies about something small. Now the entire family system enters a lecture about trust, honesty, character, and values so intense that the child starts regretting ever G-Day breathing near the truth. And yes, values matter. Accountability matters. Honesty matters. But scale matters too. When parents emotionally inflate every problem, children learn something very fast. Small truths create big waves here. And then they stop bringing small truths. Which means parents meet the issue later, bigger, uglier, and more defended than it needed to be. That is the irony. Parents often intensify small moments because they want to prevent future damage. But emotional inflation often guarantees the child will hide earlier next time, which creates bigger damage later. If you want a child to come to you sooner, the emotional cost of coming to you has to stay reasonable. That does not mean no consequence. It means consequence without emotional theater. A lot of children are not terrified of rules. They are terrified of the atmosphere that surrounds the rule once they fail it. And that atmosphere lives in tone far more than parents realize. If this sounds familiar, leave a comment with one real-life moment when your child brought you something small, and only later you realized your reaction probably made it feel much bigger than it had to be. Just one honest example. Because that moment happens in a lot more homes than people admit. The sixth invisible habit is needing the child to be okay too fast. This one looks loving, but children feel the pressure immediately. A child cries, the parent tries to stop the crying. A teen gets embarrassed. The parent tries to reframe it in 60 seconds. A child feels anxious. The parent tries to reassure it away. A teen feels rejected. The parent starts proving they should not care. And again, the intention is good. But the hidden message can sound like this. Please regulate quickly because your discomfort is uncomfortable for me too. That message teaches emotional loneliness. Not because the parent is cold, because the child learns that some feelings become easier to manage alone than in front of the parent. This is one reason kids can seem emotionally closed in family spaces and incredibly expressive with friends, journals, strangers online, or even teachers. It is not always because those people understand them better. Sometimes it is simply because those spaces do not rush them out of their own experience. And yes, children need help regulating. They need adults. They need guidance. They need steadiness. But help regulating is not the same as emotional eviction. Real support sounds more like, I can stay near this with you. Not, hurry up and get over it so we can all feel normal again. The seventh invisible habit is making honesty feel like loss of dignity. This is the deepest one. Children can handle correction better than adults think. What they struggle with is feeling small, feeling exposed, feeling ridiculous, feeling talked down to, feeling like one awkward mistake just became a statement about who they are. That is what makes them shut down. A child who hears, that choice was not okay, can stay in the relationship. A child who hears, what is wrong with you lately, starts protecting identity. A teen who hears, we need to talk about what happened, may resist, but stay. A teen who hears contempt, sarcasm, or character attacks starts disappearing emotionally in real time. And once dignity becomes unstable in family conflict, honesty drops hard. Because now the child is not just avoiding consequences, they are avoiding humiliation. That is why so many kids seem evasive, blank, defensive, or strangely casual when confronted. Sometimes they are not trying to be clever. They are trying not to collapse in front of you. Parents often misread that as disrespect. But a lot of what gets labeled attitude is really armor. And armor shows up most strongly in children who have learned that difficult moments quickly become dignity-threatening moments. So what do? They get sarcastic first. They go blank. They joke. They minimize. They lie badly. They leave. They say whatever. They act like nothing matters. Because pretending not to care can feel safer than being seen caring and then getting crushed. That is where so many families get stuck. The parent thinks, my child is impossible to reach. The child thinks, reaching you costs too much. And in that gap, both people feel rejected. But the truth is, this gap is usually built in patterns, which means it can also be rebuilt in patterns. Not with one perfect speech. Not with one giant family meeting. Not with one magical parenting phrase you save in your phone and then forget to use when real life punches you in the face. It changes through smaller shifts. You slow down before demanding clarity. You notice when you are interpreting instead of listening. You stop stacking your own emotion on top of the child's too quickly. You validate before improving. You keep problems proportional. You stop needing emotional resolution on your timetable. And most importantly, you protect the child's dignity even while holding the boundary. That is where trust starts growing back. Not because the child suddenly becomes easier, but because your presence stops feeling like a place where their inner world gets handled too roughly. And that changes everything. And this is where everything starts to come together. Because once a child learns that your love is real, but your reactions are hard to survive, they begin to split the relationship in two. One part becomes functional. That is the part where they answer questions, follow routines, bring home information, say what they are supposed to say, and keep the family moving. The other part becomes private. That is the part where the real fear lives, the real shame, the real confusion, the real social pain, the real self-doubt, the real mistakes, the real emotions they no longer trust your nervous system to hold gently. And parents often feel this split long before they understand it. They say things like, I know something is off. I feel like my child is hiding something. We live together, but I don't really know what's going on anymore. They tell me the facts, but not the truth. That feeling is real. And it usually does not mean your child stopped loving you. It means your child started protecting themselves inside the relationship. That is a heartbreaking sentence. But it is also the doorway to better parenting. Because once you see that protection is happening, you stop taking every difficult behavior so personally. You stop asking only, "Why are they doing this to me?" And you start asking, "What has this child learned they need to protect when hard feelings enter this room?" That question changes everything. Because now, a defensive tone may not just be disrespect. It may be fear, protecting dignity. Now, a flat answer may not just be laziness. It may be a child trying to avoid emotional escalation. Now, a lie may not just be dishonesty. It may be an immature attempt to keep one painful moment from becoming a full emotional event. Now, secrecy may not just be rebellion. It may be the child's only remaining strategy for keeping some control over how exposed they feel. Again, none of that excuses harmful behavior, but it explains why punishment, pressure, and more control often fail to produce the honesty parents are desperate for. If the child's real problem is not lack of rules, but lack of emotional safety, then stronger rules without stronger safety will only create better hiding. This is why some children become incredibly skilled at looking okay. They know how to say the right thing. They know how to smooth the moment. They know how to give just enough truth to make the conversation end. They know how to sound calm while quietly disappearing inside. And on the surface, this can look like maturity. But many times, it is not maturity. It is emotional adaptation. It is the child learning that honesty has to be carefully managed in order to stay connected without getting overwhelmed. That is not the kind of wisdom we want children to develop. We do want discernment. We do want self-control. We do want accountability. But we do not want children learning that the safest way to be loved is to be edited. And that is exactly what happens in families where the emotional cost of truth stays too high for too long. So what lowers that cost? Not becoming permissive, not acting like nothing matters, not throwing away standards, rules, or consequences. What lowers the cost is steadiness. Steadiness in your first reaction, steadiness in your face, steadiness in your tone, steadiness in your timing. Steadiness in your willingness to hear something difficult without immediately turning the room into a courtroom, a seminar, or a personal crisis. Children trust steadiness, not because it feels exciting, because it feels survivable. And survivable is what honesty needs. Think about how many parents accidentally create a pattern like this. The child speaks. The parent interrupts with interpretation. The child defends. The parent hears attitude. The child shuts down. The parent feels rejected. The child now has to protect not only their original feeling, but also themselves from the parent's hurt reaction. This is why so many family conversations feel like they get hijacked in the first 90 seconds. Nobody is lying in some grand dramatic way. Nobody is trying to destroy the relationship. But both people are reacting faster than they are understanding. And because parents have more power in the relationship, the parent's emotional speed matters more. That is difficult, but true. Children do not set the emotional climate of a home in the same way adults do. They influence it, yes. They can disrupt it, absolutely. But adults shape the safety of the climate, which means when a parent learns to slow down, the entire family system begins to change. Not instantly, not perfectly, but meaningfully. A slower parent notices more. They notice when their question is really an accusation wearing polite clothes. They notice when the problem is small, but their fear is making it feel huge. They notice when the child needs space before explanation. They notice when advice is arriving before understanding. They notice when they are responding to their own childhood, not only to the child standing in front of them. That last one matters more than most people realize. Because parenting is rarely just happening between you and your child. It is often happening between your child and every unresolved feeling you still carry. If you are shamed a lot, you may react strongly to behavior that reminds you of being out of control. If you are ignored, you may panic when your child withdraws. If you were judged, you may rush to prevent your child from making mistakes that once made you feel small. If you grew up around chaos, you may over-control normal mess because disorder feels dangerous in your body. And none of that makes you a bad parent. It makes you a human being, parenting through memory. But when memory drives the whole interaction, children often end up paying for emotional alarms they did not create. That is why awareness is so powerful. The goal is not to become some perfect, permanently calm, psychologically flawless parent who never gets triggered and responds to every hard moment with the serenity of a monk in a beautifully lit documentary. The goal is to catch yourself sooner. To realize my fear is getting louder than my understanding. My need for control is rising. I am starting to make this about my discomfort, not just my child's behavior. I am about to teach the wrong lesson emotionally, even if my words sound correct. That pause can save a relationship over and over again. Because the deepest lesson children learn in hard moments is not always the one you intended to teach. You may intend to teach honesty, but if the room feels crushing, the child learns avoidance. You may intend to teach responsibility, but if your reaction feels humiliating, the child learns self-protection. You may intend to teach respect, but if your tone feels contemptuous, the child learns fear or emotional distance. Children remember the emotional meaning of the moment long after they forget the exact lecture. And that emotional meaning becomes part of them. It becomes the voice in their head when they make mistakes. It becomes their expectation of what conflict feels like. It becomes the blueprint they carry into close friendships, romantic relationships, and eventually into the way they may speak to their own children one day. That is why everyday family communication matters so much. Not because every sentence is life-changing, but because repetition is. Repeated shame becomes secrecy. Repeated emotional overreaction becomes hiding. Repeated steadiness becomes trust. Repeated repair becomes resilience. And repair deserves more attention than it usually gets. Because even when parents understand all of this, they will still get it wrong sometimes. You will overreact. You will speak too fast. You will misread the moment. You will ask one question too many. You will sound sharper than you meant to. You will bring your own fear into the room. That is going to happen. The question is not whether you ever mess up. The question is what your child learns after you mess up. If you become defensive, deny it, justify everything, or force the child to act like the moment did not land hard, then the child learns that your authority matters more than reality. But if you come back and repair, something much healthier happens. I made that harder than I needed to. You were already overwhelmed, and I pushed. I was trying to get the truth too fast. I let my fear turn into pressure. We still need to deal with what happened, but I want to do it without making you feel attacked. You did not deserve that tone. I want to be a safer person to tell the truth to. That kind of repair is powerful. Not because it erases consequences, not because it makes the child instantly open up, but because it changes the emotional architecture of the relationship. Now the child learns something extraordinary. My parent can be strong without becoming emotionally unreachable. My parent can admit impact without falling apart. My parent can hold the boundary and still care about how it felt to me. Conflict does not have to end in emotional exile. That lesson is gold, because many people grow up never learning it. They grow up believing that mistakes cost closeness. That truth causes damage. That vulnerability gets turned into weakness. That love becomes unstable the moment something hard enters the room. And then they spend adulthood trying to unlearn that pain. So if you can teach your child something different, even imperfectly, you are giving them far more than good behavior. You are giving them an emotional model for secure connection. Now let's speak directly about teenagers for a second. Teenagers often get described in the most unhelpful ways possible. Moody, lazy, dramatic, manipulative, disrespectful. addicted to screens, impossible to read. And yes, teens can absolutely be difficult. They can be intense, self-absorbed, reactive, contradictory, impulsive, secretive, and exhausting. But they are also in one of the most psychologically vulnerable stages of development. They are trying to separate from parents without losing belonging, trying to build identity while drowning in comparison, trying to become private while still deeply needing guidance, trying to look okay while often feeling profoundly unsure. So when a parent responds to that phase with constant suspicion, emotional chasing, or control disguised as closeness, the teen does what any human does when autonomy feels threatened. They retreat. Not always because they are rejecting you, often because they are trying to preserve a self that still feels fragile. And this is why the strongest parents of teens are often not the parents who know every detail. They are the parents who have become the safest place for the difficult details to land when the teen is finally ready. That is a different kind of power. Quieter, but stronger. It does not say, "I must access your inner life on demand." It says, "I am building the kind of relationship that makes it more likely you will bring me the truth before it is too late." That is real influence. Not control in the moment, influence over time. And influence over time is what protects relationships. Because a child will not remember every rule. A teen will not remember every speech. But they will remember what happened to them emotionally when they were struggling in front of you. Did they feel watched? Did they feel cornered? Did they feel mocked? Did they feel managed? Did they feel like a disappointment? Did they feel like your stress became their responsibility? Or did they feel that even in conflict, even with limits, even after mistakes, their dignity was still intact? That is the question under almost everything. Can my child stay fully human in front of me when they are not at their best? If the answer is yes, trust grows. If the answer is no, hiding grows. And if this is helping you see your child and yourself more clearly, subscribe to the channel and share this with one person who truly cares about parenting, child psychology, and building safer family relationships. Because many people are trying to be good parents, while unknowingly repeating emotional patterns that make honesty feel harder than silence. And once you understand this, you start hearing your child with new ears. You hear that nothing may mean too much. You hear that whatever may mean I'm bracing. You hear that I forgot may carry shame. You hear that sarcasm may be fear wearing armor. You hear that distance may not be rejection at all. It may be the child's only available form of protection in a moment that already feels too intense. This does not mean children should never be challenged. They absolutely should. Children need frustration tolerance. They need accountability. They need limits. They need adults who can say no and mean it. But challenge works best inside connection. Accountability works best inside dignity. Truth works best where reaction is steady enough to receive it. That is the balance. Not weak parenting, not harsh parenting. Safe parenting with structure. And safe parenting with structure is what helps children grow into people who can tell the truth without feeling like the truth will destroy belonging. So the next time your child gets quiet, before you rush in with questions, pause. The next time they get defensive, before you escalate, pause. The next time they hide something, before you turn the moment into a verdict on their whole character, pause. And ask yourself one better question. What is this child trying to protect right now? Because that question opens the door to wisdom. It moves you from control to understanding, from panic to leadership, from reaction to relationship. And when parents begin living from that question, something beautiful starts to happen. The child may not change overnight. The eye rolls may not disappear. The awkward half-truths may not suddenly turn into perfect honesty. The hard seasons may still be hard. But the emotional climate begins to soften. The child starts testing a little more truth. The parent becomes less frightening in difficult moments. Repair happens faster. Distance loses some of its power. And slowly, sometimes so slowly you almost miss it, honesty starts finding its way back. Not because the child has become fearless, but because your presence has become steadier. And in the end, that is what children need most. Not a perfect parent. Not a parent who never gets angry. Not a parent with flawless language and end-K patience. They need a parent whose love does not become emotionally dangerous the moment things get hard. A parent whose boundaries are firm without being shaming. A parent whose concern DDK not become pressure. A parent whose guidance does not erase dignity. A parent who can stay close enough to DDK that the child has to disappear to CDK. That is what builds trust. That is what keeps the relationship alive. That is what makes home feel like a place where the truth can still come back. And when a child knows, deep down, that the truth is allowed to come back, even after mistakes, even after fear, even after silence, something changes inside them. They do not have to spend so much energy hiding. They do not have to become so edited. They do not have to choose between honesty and self-protection in quite the same way. They start learning a different lesson. I can be real here. I can get it wrong and still return. I can tell the truth and still belong. And that lesson may become one of the greatest gifts a parent ever gives.